Good evening, everyone, and welcome to yet another evening of great conversation and poetry, part of our live and alive conversation series featuring some of the greatest authors from Romania and Britain today. My name is Gabriela Mocan, and I'm the creative producer and co-curator of Romania Rocks, the first festival of Romanian British literature organized by the Romanian Cultural Institute in London, with support from the European Literature Network in the UK, featuring a stellar lineup of authors and translators and a wide variety of events over these 4 weeks. With more than half of our events over the course of these past 2 weeks, that are already out there for you to enjoy, thanks to London Video Stories, they can all be accessed via the RCI's and the ELNet's YouTube channels and websites. We promise more exciting encounters in the next 2 weeks when we'll call it a festival with a reading marathon and a rock concert to remember. All of our events are free. The books we're discussing are available to purchase from our partner bookshops, and all the festival details can be found on our websites. For those of you that are following us tonight, if you'd like to address any questions to our special guests for tonight, please don't hesitate and post your questions in the chat box below the live stream on RCI's and ELNet's Facebook pages. For tonight's conversation, I'm very happy and honored to welcome 2 of Romania's foremost authors, Ruxandra Cesereanu and Andrei Codrescu, who will surely win you over with their high-octane poetry and electric personalities. For those who don't know her by now, Ruxandra Cesereanu is a poet, writer, and literary critic, also known as a journalist, academic, literary historian, and film critic. She is a professor at the Babeș-Bolyai University in Cluj-Napoca, one of Romania's leading universities, and is the editor of Steaua magazine. She is joining Andrei Codrescu, a man of many talents himself, just like his interlocutor, a poet, novelist, essayist, screenwriter, translator, editor, and between 1983 and 2016, a regular commentator on America's National Public Radio. Andrei Codrescu left Romania in 1965 and settled in Detroit in 1966, later moving to New York and publishing his poems in English, while continuing sporadically to write in Romanian. As a matter of fact, his latest volume of poems and stories written in Romanian, entitled Diacritic Dream, Vis Diacritic, is set to be released by Nemira Publishing House in 3 weeks. When I first thought of this event and of inviting Andrei Codrescu and Ruxandra Cesereanu to be part of our festival, I had quite a few reasons, and very good ones at that. I recalled Andrei telling me about his great friendship with Ruxandra when we were launching his poetry collection No Time Like Now at the London Book Fair last year. I also knew about their collaborative work. On the other hand, I was and am a great admirer of them both. And living in the same city with Ruxandra, the city of Cluj-Napoca, I wanted to bring Andrei closer to his Transylvania, not that far from his native city of Sibiu. But the utmost reason, of course, is the sharp and insightful poets in them, always on the side of lucidity, dignity, and freedom, alongside the exciting prospect of hearing them discuss each other's work. Ruxandra, welcome, and thank you very much for being with us tonight.
Thank you also for being invited to Romania Rocks, together with Andrei.
Between 2006 and 2007, your friendship gave birth to a book you wrote together in Romanian via email, entitled The Forgiven Submarine, which was later translated by Andrei himself into English and published by Black Widow Press in 2009. A new Romanian edition also appeared in 2017 with an added 120 pages of correspondence between the two of you during the writing process. And my first question for both of you is, where did your friendship begin and where did this joint project originate?
What's about in the Forgiven Submarine and how we wrote this book? In a simple way, this book has three directions. One direction is in fact the two lessons of poetry which a pianist and a beatnik are teaching to a submarine who's very wishful learning poetry. But in an unsimple way, there is also anima animus story between me and Andrei, because we try to adapt each other as a poet and as a human being. In a way, he was representing the American poetry and I was representing the European poetry. So it was also a polemics. And if you allow me, a third direction is the fact that we wrote inside this poem about a parallel history of our memories from childhood, from the times we were teenager, from our youth, because both of us, as you said, Gabriela, we are coming from Transylvania, but our Transylvania was not only the real one, it was also a phantasma. And the story about this poem, how we started this poem, all was a very playful intention. It was a game, but a game which became very profound and very serious, because I met Andrei to a festival of literature in Neptune. It was a festival of literature for the writers of Romanian origins in the exile, and he came because he was awarded the Ovidiu prize. He was awarded the most important Ovidiu prize for a writer from the exile. And I wanted to have an interview with him about his extravagancy as an author, because I consider Andrei to be a multiple subject. And at one point, thinking about the questions, I confessed to him that I wrote a literary manifesto called Delirionism. And after he read my manifesto, Andrei was very, very playful and amused. And he said that he considered himself also a delirionist in poetry. And at this point, also playful, I answered to him that I would like in the future to write together a poem. Of course, I was thinking to a poem of 2 pages, maybe 3 pages, but not more. And this was the beginning, because his answer was very short. Let's start it. You will start this poem. So I start first piece and he answered, and then once again I answered to him and he answered once again, and like this we arrived in something like 5 weeks during October 2006 to 70 pages, because at one point we started to reread, to correct some things, and we understood that the poem is ready and that is a fascinating monster. Yes, a fascinating monster. I think Andrei agreed this formula, because of course the final poem of 70 pages was not a delirionistic poem, not at all. My formula, my first formula, it was only a pretext to write together something. And I must confess that each of us, we were very free. We have a complete liberty, an extreme liberty. Each of us, we wrote how much we wanted, how much it was, how long it was our vision, how intense it was our vision. Sometimes we wrote 10 lines, sometimes 70 lines, sometimes even 100 lines. And the other one didn't answer with an equal number of lines, but depending on his poetical breath and inspiration and imagination. There were no rehearsals of structure, of technical, only for the last poem, for the final of the poem, we thought a little bit, we negotiate a structure of the last fragment of the last poem. So if I am allowed to say so, the splendor of this poem was in fact his spontaneity and the fact that it was a wonderful experience and experiment.
The total freedom. And actually, it's very interesting. I think during that time when you were working on this book, Andrei was somewhere in the middle of the wilderness, if I'm not wrong.
Sometimes he was there, sometimes he was...
for those who are following us, yes, maybe you can tell us a little bit about that. You lived for a while, you decided to leave the city. And I think while you were working with Ruxandra on this poem, you were spending much of the time there.
Yes, for the most part, I was living in the wilderness in the Buffalo River National Park, which is, I had about 3,000 hectares or acres of wilderness and a river and caves. And so it was a wonderful landscape to write in. At the same time, Ruxandra, you covered very well, you spoke very well of how we proceeded. I just want to add that we met at the Black Sea, and before I flew back to the United States, she gave me a present of shells, gave me some shells, which I thought was a wonderful present, and I took them and put them in my suitcase and went through the customs and got home, and then I opened the suitcase, and this overwhelming sea scent of the sea took over the room, because it turns out that these shells still had the animals inside of them. And I hadn't been caught at the border, because certainly they would have stopped me from smuggling the Black Sea animals into the United States. But there was something wonderfully symbolic about that too, because the shells were, the poem was born in a way like Venus from the shell in those days. And we wrote each other brief letters expressing the pleasure of meeting and reading her, because I know some of her work. And then we started, as she said, playfully and casually, and it became quite a serious endeavor after some time, because partly because of the difference in the hours, because Romania has 6 hours or 7 hours ahead of the Ozarks. I think it was 7 hours then, and it made for some, when we started to become serious about it, I didn't sleep waiting for Ruxandra to answer, and on her end, she was probably equally, I felt involved in this thing we are making. And so at some point we had worked out a very strange schedule, and I think people around us thought we were just a bit off the ground and walking up hills. So I think the entire experience of the poem partly was very interesting to me, because we didn't know each other well enough to hide anything from each other. So it was a poem that was entirely open to absolutely anything the other person was saying. And it was at first an imaginary person, then there was the poem, which became a third partner in this conversation, this making. And at times,
and speaking about the title, because it was a madness with this title. Andrei wrote to me, but why a forgiven submarine? What does it mean, this? And I said, I don't know. This is the title. It's something hazardous. It's something maybe absurd. We will see what is a forgiven submarine. I don't know. And at the beginning he said, but this is absurd. Okay, I said, let's see what is this absurdness.
I still have no idea what the forgiven submarine was, who forgave it, why it was a submarine. And it was the same question that Mircea Codrescu asked in the preface he wrote to the first edition. He was intrigued as well. And we are still in the process of finding out what this forgiven submarine was, but I have an idea that it does have to do with our respective cultures and the burying of certain
Exactly.
periods of history and personal history and collective history. And so, you know, the surfacing and the resurfacing of this, including our childhoods and the memories that you mentioned, eventually we'll have a bigger picture of the title.
It's a wonderful story behind this project and a wonderful book. And I'm sure that everybody would like to get on board your submarine. So for this reason, I would like to invite you to read a few fragments from the book.
Okay, so we shall read the first two poems, the beginning, my beginning, and then Andrei's response and his beginning, to say so. Then we will go 70 pages more, and we will read the final poem, which is technically completely different from the other poems, because here Andrei negotiate with me to write like this: 3 lines Andrei, 3 I. So he started with 3 lines, I respond, and then other 3 lines, and so on. And in the end, there were my 3 lines. So we will have the beginning and the end. Okay? Okay, let's go. For some time now, I felt the need to dive down to a submerged submarine, to willingly lose myself inside of it, not alone, but with a drunk fool in tow, to feel clothed in angels bleeding from their lips, to feel my hair electrified by a hurricane, a mystery of curls, with a drunken fool in tow, we'd make of this a forgiven submarine. But forgiven by whom? For Christ's sakes? By God? By animals? By creatures stinking of something nameless? I had no idea, but I kept humming about this forgiveness, stuck in my throat, panting for wanting to lock myself inside this submerged submersible.
For some time now, I've been feeling the need for a co-pilot because of the original 2 who'd begun the journey in the submarine. One died in the library under a bookshelf that fell on him when the submarine hit hard gray matter, the god of boredom walking madly to and fro on the ocean bottom, seized by an appetite for Icarus, for submarines, for depth seekers. The other had barely escaped being devoured and was now dying of hunger, and my need for a winged companion was growing unchecked. I had a license to dive into the depths, but since I'd been pacified somewhat by fleshy folds and spirals, I sang the praises of depths only telepathically, depths unentered that my calls reached only superficially, to where thousands of idiots covered the great ocean, scribbling with phosphorescent ink on the foam. But one day, the electricity failed, and the velvety darkness descended, a deep and nameless forgiveness born of itself.
Okay, and now the final poem.
Wounded, lame, wet, filled with one another's atoms, martyrs of incarnate poetry, they touch each other's hands through the rags of the sub, torn by salt, want, rescued abstractions, and forgiven in smoke circles as if in a museum.
But neither God nor the devil can cut these ravers' hair or trim their nails. The submarine was a fetus curled inside another curled fetus. The depths had shiny teeth of fantasy like a Russian doll.
It was the curled DNA of salvation, opened by 2 key words, whispered twice by each one of them, too easy for a safe cracker, too sweet for a techno savage with the dust of cities on his drum.
Even the torn zipper of feelings could not redeem. Only the poetry of Ave Maria could pierce into a howl, throwing her piano from the 11th floor so the wolves could hear.
Summoned under her balcony precisely at the time the piano falls, two endangered species protected by myth, poets, and wolves cannot destroy each other to reverse the landscape like a Dada sketch.
Too bad we buried Tristan Tzara in a sealed container. Maybe we could have kept him alive with the amphetamine of a love song, fountain in a mosque. This is happiness, a pouncing, splashing.
Balm and tar, and the two wandering monks with hands full of paper snowflakes. One from a gray Bible in which slumber centuries shipwrecked on poetry's island. Dream on until you can sing of love or waste yourselves under the warm bread paddy wagon coming.
A misunderstanding, a sea turtle falls blindly on us. With lipstick on our eyelids, we renounce blood, soul, and prayer in vertical sleep to pilots stand by the fished night embraced. That's it.
And between these two, the beginning and the end of this poem, several lives pass. And they were our lives only in part, because some of it came from somewhere else. And I think we were surrounded by mysterious beings, from angels to devils, and reading also in our letters, which accompanied this poem. We talked about books we were reading and about our literatures and poetry and so on. So also there were writers present, there were poets present. And so we were writing with our culture, with Romanian poets. I was writing with poets I knew in New York. Everybody was present. It was a sort of a phosphate to sound of a crowd of invisible helpers.
And we had a tour of reading in New York, in St. Patrick's, but also in New Orleans, in a cultural bar, in a poetical bar, in the old neighborhood of New Orleans. And there, all the people came for our reading, like in a carnival, if I remember well.
It's definitely a different sort of book, a very special one. And I wanted to ask you, since you mentioned this, that several lives passed and also 10 years passed from the first edition to the second Romanian edition, in which you decided to include this correspondence. What made you want to do this 10 years after the first book came out?
Because when we published the first edition, we thought maybe it's not the time for the letters we change, for the letters where we discussed about. But 10 years after, because there were so many critical reviews and essays on this book, we decided that it could be interesting. And also, if our book is a fascinating monster, it could be also a double fascinating monster to publish these letters where we had the theoretical, the ideatical discussion about our poem.
Are you thinking about a future English translation for this second edition as well?
Only if Andrei had time for this, and I don't know if he has time for, because it's a huge work. Yes.
Well, if I had the opportunity to actually re-edit the entire correspondence, which is about 1,000 pages, I would probably choose things that, that Ruxandra would object to. So I think it's a beautiful work, just the way it is.
In Romanian.
In Romanian.
He wants to say.
I mean, I could translate, of course, but it's not, the letters were written in Romanian. you cannot really. The poem was written in the language of poetry, but the letters were written in Romanian.
In a different one, yeah. We will move on a little bit later in 2018 this time and look at Ruxandra's latest actually book, a poem manifesto entitled Letter to a Friend and Back to the Country, which was published in 2018 and also translated into English more recently by Andrew Davidson Novosibsky. It's a book that's actually inspired an award-winning film directed by Cornel Mihalache and also a performance directed by Felix Odangiu, starring students...
Philip Odangiu, yes.
Philip Odangiu, sorry, thank you. Starring students of his from the Faculty of Theatre and Film in Cluj. Before talking about this book with you, Ruxandra, I would invite all of you to watch a clip from this performance.
Țara se duce de râpă. Îți amintești cum Dumnezeu îl întreabă pe Hristos într-una din Evangheliile imposibile, dacă i-a vestit pe cei adormiți? Țara e ca o jupuitură acum, dar dincolo de piele nu se mai vede carnea. Și doar un drapel găurit, care miroase a vechi și bătrân. Tu ești captiv în moazile tale craniene, iar țara stă lângă noi ca un cățel părăsit.
Depresia personală și depresia de țară sunt niște azilanți pe o bancă, arată ca un căpcăun cu buze din fibre de sticlă. În vreme ce pe drum...
De ce vestiți pe cei adormiți așa cum scrie într-o Evanghelie interzisă? Sau țara noastră e chiar substanța din care somnul tăios își confecționează notele muzicale?
It is a truly remarkable and powerful book that speaks about past and present-day Romania more seen through past eyes, with the loving voice of a surgeon who is ready to remove its country's tumors, as you stated yourself in many of your interviews, Ruxandra. Where did this poem originate?
Well, first of all, I have to say that I conceived this poem as a lyrical fresco about the Romanian post-communism, and it is a book related to another book, which is a novel. My novel, my narrative fresco from 2013, One Sky Above All, which is a narrative fresco about the Romanian communism. So I have a novel about the Romanian communism and a poem about the Romanian post-communism. So two books are together. There is a diptych. Even the novel was written in 10 years and the poem was written maybe in 3-4 months. And here I have an explanation. If the manual of history could not contain all the current history of Romania, a manifesto, a lyrical manifesto, a poem of a mosaic type or puzzle type, which is using the method of the collage or of the jam session, could assume such a current history of Romania. Even, I must add that with the dramatic or tragical history of Romania, you could not play as an author, but you can build a flower power poem with insights of graffiti, with songs from the streets, with slogans of the protesters, and all having in the background a sort of poetical liturgy. First of all, this poem was an electronic book, which I sent to something like 30 or 40 writers, because I wasn't sure I shall print this poem. But the emails, the reaction to this electronic manuscript, they were so intense and so many. And all of my fellow writers, they told me that they insisted to print this book. They insisted to make from this poem a book, because it's necessary as a written protest. It was, at the beginning, it was a lamento. The manifesto, it was a lamento about the current Romania, but then it began and it became an urge to rebellion, as it is now in the end. And of course, all the time we are moving, when we are thinking to the post-communist Romania, we are moving between anti-utopia and utopia. This is Romania. So my poem had also these two directions, the anti-utopian one and the utopian one. And there were two origins, or two causes, to say so, of this poem, because the social political atmosphere in Romania in 2017, 2018, it was very violent. The corruption was the new cancer of Romania. So when I saw the things like this, like a Romanian cancer, like a national cancer of my country, this was one origin. This was one very strong origin. The second one was a tragic thing in my biography, the fact that my mother was diagnosed also with cancer. So in my mind and in my heart, I made a superposition between the two illnesses, between the two cancers, the illness, the cancer of Romania, and the corruption, the social political corruption in Romania, and the real physical illness of my mother. So the country and my mother, they became together a matria. This is a hybrid word, a hybrid term, in which we have two words, the words mother, mater from Latin, and patria, country. So the poem became a sort of lamento for the matria, for mater, which is the country and the mother. Because in my arrogance, I thought at one point that I can save them both, and it didn't fit. It wasn't like this. So this manifesto was in fact a letter to the other Romanians, a letter to my fellow poets, and a letter to myself and to my family. And one of the graffiti, or one of the most important graffiti I put in this book, is the graffiti poetry is in the street. Because poetry, this was very emblematic for my manifesto, because poetry was in the street in the 19th in the University Square. Poetry was also in the street in 2017 and 2018. My manifesto was in the street and came from the street, so almost it didn't belong to me. It belonged to the others.
Because, and in a way,
yes,
I think it's
many lines are describing scenes that I saw myself in 19 in the University Square, and then in 2017 and 2018 during the movement Resist. And there are also two very important graffitis I use in this poem. Two graffitis that there are near the building I'm living, near my house. One, it is, "What will happen with your soul if you die today?" And the other one is red, yellow, and disaster. Red, yellow, and ruin. You know that our flag is red, yellow, and blue. But the graffiti near my edifice, near my home, was red, yellow, and disaster and ruin. So this political, social political Romanian tumor, cancer, It was an illness with many directions, which was not sure to be cured, but I tried to cure this, because poetry can be a surgical instrument. Poetry, I think it could be a linguistic catapult, it could be a spiritual platform, and it could be an exorcism. Of course, poetry can save, can cure individually, but when it has a social political direction, a civic direction, and an identity of manifesto, maybe it could be a cure also at a collective level. I don't know.
I really look forward to hearing Andrei's response to your poem. But before that, I would like to invite you to read a fragment for us.
Many thanks to Andrew Davidson Novosivsky, who, as you said, translated my poem in 2 months, I think. You don't need the erotic to write patriotic poetry. Don't need partners in crime or outraged bystanders. You don't need armor to tear down the wall of jelly when our country is defective and funding for autism care is cut. Missionaries greet us from all corners of the world with emails in the name of Jesus for us to become renowned servants if we manage to break out piggy banks out of our thoughts. This is the Romanian Rhapsody, children of God. Look how personal depression opens the door for national depression on days when female officials wear their hair like casseroles and when the mouth of male officials smell like horse. The regret of hangovers at the crack of dawn. The partiers left, no more taxis, no more carriages, salt, sugar and oil stored away with the mites for the 50-day fast. Political pagodas and double-chin security guards, office buildings held up with ropes and washed with rubber gloves. Here live owners of safes, those privy to paper power, the national geishas masquerading at the toast of the town, the macho legislators who shrink from coitus interruptus, the strumpets and their bosses with fully banked picnic blankets, the congressional urbane and the talking heads at their side, the parliament's barbers and their lead-plated diplomas. Adrenaline always pumps through verdicts and scams. On the other side of town, the agora of funny guys and snoops, liars toting badges, fingers drawn over them by the right hand, and look, the unending call to communion, come to the light. The national vertigo or individual vertigo, the uptick in mental institution, a kind of wisdom to the usurers, the shapeshifters' wasteland gonorrhea, those left behind and the desperation drawn between their eyebrows, the smell of dish soup on the demagogue's pinwheel, the transfiguration according to Basilica doodlers, the government climbs another government, climbs another government, red, yellow, and ruin, Russian roulette, matryoshka, the domino theory in triplicate, raw meat consumption written in the constitution of the laboratory. We dream of patriarchs subsumed in vegetation, of solar farms for otherworldly visitors. Then we wake in a non-levitating cave. In its digital stasis, my country is photocopied like a jewel certificate for birth and death. When in Lamech's land, do you remember what is the right book? Remember any Alodia or the Illuminations? Go in peace, our departed. I hold a scalpel and sing. I hold a stylite scalpel.
You even wrote about Ruxandra's poem.
Yes.
In the review, of course.
This is what I love about Ruxandra and her poem, is they are one with the place. Her civic engagement and her passion for the life of her country and the values that she loves and holds are one and the same as her own intimate self. And to write a poem like this takes a great deal of courage and inspiration. And I would say this is the Howl of Romania. You know, this is the famous poem of Allen Ginsberg that was a pivotal poem for a generation in English. I think Ruxandra may have just done it for Romania. It is an incredibly moving work, and there is no doubt in any line that it is her writing it, but it is also another voice, which is a voice that's deeper, and it seems to be, you know, the voice of the country, of the people. You know, it is an extraordinary work. And I'm not surprised that it was on the streets and it was circulated in Piazza Universității during the student rebellions, because it is a poem that indeed, like Howl by Allen Ginsberg, inspired people who knew nothing about poetry to listen. And
Exactly.
it's that same engagement, I think, that brought us together, because we are both engaged in other modes of listening to our times, not just to ourselves, but to ourselves in time. And the poems I've been writing, and I've kept a journal of the pandemic from the global pandemic since March. 2 or 3 times a week. I just turned on the camera on my iPhone and I talked into it. I mean, they're not poems, but they were wonderments at the time that we live, which is very different. Some of them became poems, and eventually I have some poems, but essentially they were just spoken.
We will watch one of them actually a little bit later tonight, and that's what I was going to say. They are poems, many of them. They are so poetic and so violently beautiful, as I
yes.
before.
Well, thank you. I mean, some of them were, you know, I wrote them as poems eventually. They were just in the beginning session. They gave birth to poems.
Going back to Ruxandra's poem, I was going to say, referring to what you noticed, Andrei, as well, that I believe it was a book that made your own students maybe understand what happened in 1989 with Romania, understand Romania as it was better. And even the students that Filippo Dangiu worked with for the performance mentioned that they had a totally different engagement with their own country after reading your manifesto.
I hope so. I hope they understand, because I have faith in the young people and in my students. But I have faith, a civical faith, to say so. I try to make them to understand what is Romania, this Romania balancing from dystopia to utopia and so on. So I hope I hope it's okay. I hope they understood, but I don't know, of course.
Well, history is a funny business, because it is people who were born after 1989, they had various versions of it. If they were old enough to see it, see something on television or somewhere, they had some first-hand impressions. If they listened to their parents, they had another impression. And then they lived in the reality in which they live now, in which various parts of old Romania were used either demagogically or rhetorically for power. And to have been in that history and be able to not only be cogent, but passionate about it is an incredible gift to young people, especially who have no idea. I mean, some people still have nostalgia for something for an epoch that really had mostly misery and the color gray in it.
Yes, exactly. Before watching a clip from Cornel Mihalache's film, which is quite a striking production, actually, I would like to invite you to read a second fragment from the poem, Ruxandra.
Okay. There's a word predating my birth, subjugation. What if not words could disarm it? There's a mesocosm of rainbows which may provide the abiding cure. This is the radical, deadly Romanian rhapsody. Like a guilty messenger, I set sail an oratorio. I landed gut punches. I keyed a crouched exorcism. My country ought to be a lung free of emphysema and fibrosis, so we can inhale more than just burnt tobacco in the East. The war of light and of businesses, which saw us the locusts between hardware and software, the program write and wrote memory, a parasitic modem with cockroach letters, stolen online life, stolen stopgap biography and afterlife, dealt with like bad springs puncturing through silk to the ribs. Input and output for the planetarians with political fittings and cysts stored in a secret society's attic cellars. The coma induced through agency clusters and the last wish for universal redemption. Now only one word will do, caput. Our eternal fear, the lobotomy. A sparrow smashed alongside a truck tire. It's been frozen there for days. The cold turned it to stone. Its beak still shows the way to Orion for the lost people. Our eternal fear, the loneliness. You see the items on the supermarket shelves. You sit like a kid in the cart, imagining you're in a boat, lost at sea. You wind through the accessories and aisles on rollerblades, imagining a lighthouse somewhere when life can be seen as a never market.
And we are going to watch the final part of your poem now, put on film by Cornel Mihalache, which is, I really liked that final part. It really goes through you. So let's watch it.
Spaima noastră dintotdeauna, alienarea. Să știi că nu e noapte în care să nu mă tem de Hristos din ceilalți. Dar nu e nici noapte în care să nu știu că fiecare va învia măcar pe jumătate. Până și eu voi face la fel. Deși am fost toți apostolii și Mariile toate. Mărșăluim, rezistăm, suntem vii. Iubirea clădește, dar eu voi ghici bunăvestirea vreodată? Voi putea eu striga despre toate cele trei la un loc? Credință, nădejde, iubire. Iar acum, la sfârșit, întreb a treia și ultima oară, ca într-o parabolă de pe vremea comunismului. Parabolă rostită în o dăistinghere, mirosind a petrol. I-ai vestit pe cei adormiți?
Faith, hope, love. We pack them carefully and go all the way to present-day New York, where Andrei has authored an explosive collection of poems yet unpublished, Pandemic 2020, inspired by the harsh realities of this fateful year with the pandemic and the social and political unrest surrounding us. To me, this is a collection of violent beauty and striking imagery. What can you tell us about this new volume you're preparing for publication, Andrei?
Well, I didn't expect it, just like nobody expects the Inquisition, this global pandemic that has done a number of things that we don't yet know what they are. And certainly as poets, we have to look the thing in the directly and speak about it. And you know, these poems speak to this, and they renewed my interest in poetry. I suddenly started to see that there was something necessary going on, because I'm not allowed to be bored, because I have eternities of doing that, and now I'm, you know, something happened, and so I wrote these poems, which I would be glad to read from. Ruxandra pointed out actually that I sent them to her and I forgot. And she said, why don't you read from them? And then I read them and I said, well, that's pretty good. So here.
Yes, they are really striking poems. And
so this one is called Extinction. Extinction. Something I made up in the mirror of enmeshed languages survived briefly, then died in my lifetime. It was poetry, it was art, it was the ineffable stench of a dying world. I speak two human languages, each one mirrored by its twin and followed by its echo. Each word an abstracted world, dying when it is spoken, followed by dreams and repetition. In the morning, I make up the bed. I chase out bodies from the hollow of repetition and the echo of mirrors that have looked deeply into my sleep. Strangers roomed there. They brought news to me, ripe fruit of words fallen on the ground, ripe fruits of Babel. Before the despair of twilight sets up the mirrors for another night, daytime goes into another fleeting poem that leaves behind shadow and echo. Reader, don't bother to learn these words. I am Ishi, the last speaker of this coiled wire. My mysterious languages buzz in mirrors, inside and outside your homes. Some of them are in your dreams. Narcissus doesn't care where he sleeps. He prefers wordless poetry to vanishing mirrors, polluted springs, absorbed by screens of forgetting. Reading this, actually, I realized how much Lucian Blaga influenced this poem, because I translated Blaga from Romanian, and now suddenly reading it, I heard the echo of the springs and the kind of silences that he wrote. This one is called Memory. I forgot the secret places, but the keys are there. Also the passports and the plane tickets. We are all on the same route and passing through the walls. What I saw was your comma, and what you saw was my coda. These are some questions for fortune tellers. Ruxandra mentioned the oracular method there, and I've practiced this for a long time. I opened books at random to find out answers to questions, to real questions. It's kind of pataphysics. Questions for fortune tellers. Oh, birds who talk constantly. Oh, flowers to use for divination. Oh, pets walking on smug leashes. We have questions for you. I keep a list of questions in my pocket, my little notebook of questions. Are emojis the first language? Do ideograms express enough of what words contain? Are images more alive than words? Does a word contain 1,000 images? Is human the same in word and picture? Do nameless whirling objects whirl faster in image or in word? I no longer understand anything because of the words I use to name them. I wake up in a crisis for time these days. I earnestly ask non-humans. What passes for time is interesting, because time itself, I think, has suffered a kind of a change these days. Not the subjective time of our isolation or lockdown, but the time itself, I think, is going through some sort of change, a radical change. And so I'm not sure what it is, but we'll certainly find out. This is a project. Men wearing only masks and condoms. walk on empty streets in cities, podcasting reviews of fake movies, and unwritten books for unborn children who may or may not want to be here. The outdoor cafes are full of ghosts. The road is lined with corpses. A hairy caterpillar with 100 million legs begs for food from your daughter, America. These, you know, I mean, some of these are part of the this general feeling that when I speak to friends, some things that are important before are not important now, and some things that seem trivial have gained in weight, in importance, in gravity. And so I think this pandemic is World War III. The 20th century had its wars. The first was, the Second World War was a continuation, I think, of the First World War. And we are having our war now, which is not a violent and weaponized war, except in the sense of people are dying and time has a different feeling. So post-pandemic writing and style and look will be different. So I will just read a poem from Romanian, with a Romanian root, as it were. It has no title. When I was a child, I had no trouble destroying the world with mind rays. The neighbors who communalized our kitchen, the empty ghost houses in the overgrown bushes, behind the crumbling cement walls where ghouls screeched. The stepfather who wrestled my dog Nemo out of my arms and gave him away to someone I'm still looking for. The classmate who tried to buy the frog stanza I didn't sell him. Fathers, cities, trains, empty skies, shadow police, school. I was moody, and destruction was the vivid product of my mind. I observed ants and bees and wild cats, and I was sad for them. I was happy for the birds. I didn't know how cats destroyed them. The clouds looked fluffy until they filled up with info instead of water. Like stadiums, they now belong to corporations. They are going dark. The politics are as bad as the environment, gasping for breath. We won't make it to that nitrous oxide planet, friend. We won't laugh involuntarily when our teeth and eyes are gone. Walk like the goats, straight up. What is this rock for, anyway? So
we were talking about these poems and also about No Time Like Now, and she found these poems much stronger, and I would like to invite her to tell us, to share her thoughts on this collection.
And I think that maybe it's the time to present this creative mosaic, Andrei, is this artistic palimpsest, or as I already confessed, that I consider him multiple subject. I know that he's laughing a little bit about this formula, multiple subject. But you remember that we discussed also about Fernando Pessoa and his heteronyms and his multiple subject, and you like this. What we found in Andrei, there are several directions which are making a hybrid palimpsest. I mean, we are finding in his artistic creativity the remainings of a Balkan culture. We can find also a Central European substrate from Sibiu, where he was born. Of course, we have the Jewish sensibility. Even when we are speaking about Jewish sensibility, we are speaking about also the tradition that sometimes turns upside down, because Andrei is very ironic and self-ironic. And finally, and very decisive, I think we have this Americanized lawyer of the immigrant who assimilated the culture of his host country And in New York, he met his mentor, who is a very famous poet, he's Ted Berrigan. And he met the beat counterculture and the flower power medley of New York. And this was very important because these achievements, they encounter the two cultural models, the two Romanian cultural models of Andrei, who are, he already confessed, who are Lucian Blaga, an expressionist poet, but Dionysian and also an Apollonian thinker. And the other one is Tristan Tzara, the founder of the Dada movement and an avant-garde artist. But it was very important, this beat influence of the poets. He spoke, I spoke about Ted Berrigan, but I'm speaking also about Allen Ginsberg and Howl and Kaddish, because it's very important the way in which all these movements were reconverted by Andrei through of the America of the 70s, the years when he immigrated to America. But what I want to say is, in the end, speaking precisely about the pandemic 2020, we heard Andrei has a special wit, which appreciates the freedom to think, the freedom to write. He is very allergic to anything that borders on cultural coercion, on censorship, on symbolical or metaphorical lobotomy. And this is very important now, in nowadays, and not only during the pandemic. His wit for liberty, his wit for being against any censorship. I like very much his poems, because these are not only free poems, but there are poems where we can find the American tradition of beat poetry and Lucian Blaga. Yes, I felt there is in your poem the last Lucian Blaga, and the Lucian Blaga you translated.
Well, speaking of Ted Berrigan, my mentor, a poem he called People of the Future, where he addresses the people of the future. And he says, people of the future, while you are reading these poems, remember, you didn't write them, I did. Speaking of multiple subjects, you know, but, really, these poems are uniquely made in time, in our time. And I love the poets who did that, you know, including Mayakovsky, who wrote it really wrote the Russian Revolution in its idealistic phase, and then was killed by what followed, and the passion that he brought to his times, and also his personality, his feelings. These kinds of works can be founding works. I mean, they can be read later, both for the history they embody and for the way people felt, which is never described in history or by historians who cannot write about how people lived truly, because all they have is poems. And to continue an idea that Ruxandra mentioned, poetry is not just something for the future, it will become a currency. It will become a currency, or valuta in Romanian. It will be a currency because, like our fingerprints, it is unique to the poet. And we will exchange poems if we trust the language to do something. As Auden said, poetry doesn't do anything. Well, he was wrong. Poetry does things, and we can use it in that way. I'll put my poems against cash, against dollars and euros and all of that. It will be the currency of the future.
I'm very tempted to agree with you. I was thinking of your plague diary as well, which I've been following. I've been a frequent visitor on your Facebook page dedicated to this project. For everybody who's following us, do follow Andrei Codrescu at Andrei Codrescu here. That is his Facebook page dedicated to the plague diary. And before inviting Andrei to read maybe one, two more of his poems, I would like us to watch a clip. It's one entry and it's entitled Sigh, a very powerful one.
September 2020, a hint of fall. A soupçon of breath, no smoke here. At long last a sigh, not relief, but a pure sigh that knows it is only a sigh ahead of a great weeping. I try to pack as much happiness as can fill a sigh. Wine skin of the soul shrunken by fire, plague, madness. A sigh can pour new blood in it, inflate it to contain all that we have lost and will never have again. Youth, good air, breath itself. A sigh that is identical to all sighs, from the first sigh of this animal form until now, capacious sigh, squeezed in by shadows and news, sigh that excludes the world, sigh that is outside the relentless motion of maggots devouring body, world, and sense. Sigh. A perfect sigh, as deep as a mountain lake where silence lives. Death sigh, from which the diver can emerge at last into your world of pain, strife, time. Timeless sigh, for as long as you last until your taut, young skin explodes. To die in a sigh for an unearthly call, a gift of autumn silence in this hell. September, Brooklyn, New York, as the West burns, as the South floods, as fascism marches on, as fighting powers grow or wane.
The Plague Diary is in fact an extension of your latest poems, Pandemic 2020, or the other way around. They complete the picture. And reading your poems makes me think of Charles Bukowski, who said that writing poems is not difficult, living them is difficult. I find these words to be so fit for our times. Before ending this conversation and taking one question from our audience, I would like to invite you, Andrei, to read maybe one, two more of your poems.
Oh, thank you. I'll read this is called with Walter Benjamin in Queens. Now, Walter Benjamin is very well read these days. You can't make a new man, but you can kill old ones. Walter Benjamin in Moscow, 1927, noted posters exhorting the masses with the slogan, "Time is money," attributed to Lenin, the only god the lazy Russian masses pretended to listen to, but did not, no matter how big Mayakovsky made the letters. New men apexed in Metropolis. Then the execution of prototypes was on. Lenin, like Chernyshevsky, asked, "What is to be done?" tramways, sleds, steel, factories, baby's breast, milk, pioneers. Lenin and the new man capitalized themselves, even in this poem, thanks to their monster babies, spell check and autocorrect. Benjamin went to Moscow at the right time, or just in time, to escape being an executed prototype or frozen in the tundra. His timing served him by not being in New York, either in 2020. A lucky man, he wrote his thoughts and executed himself. He was the new man, after all, not Leninist, not sci-fi, a free man. And then I'll just end this now and then sonnet, which is not a sonnet, it's a now and then sonnet. There was a time when there was too much, and it was okay. We called it Soma. Now there is a time when there is too little, and it's not okay. We call it Yoda. Nostalgia isn't my forte, it's your catch. I've made myself impervious to the stem. There are places that are inspiring for a while. This is a good reason to keep them from spies. There was a time when you were I, and we were them. That was in 1967. We were lousy with snitches. People would like to know if the field of pronouns just grew there or was cultivated snitch by snitch. Now is the time to ask that niche question. It is 2020 when everything is sprouting niches.
Thank you so much to both of you. This is heart-filling and explosive at the same time. Going back to what you said earlier, Andrei, referring to Auden, poetry makes nothing happen. I really don't think it does not. Toni Morrison said that all good art has to be political, is political. We also have a question from our audience, which I'm going to read to you before finishing. Great to see and hear you, Ruxandra Cesereanu and Andrei Codrescu. So the question is, I would love to hear what these two great poets could share about their views on the poetry today and how they managed to cope with this world. Is the forgiven submarine still a solution?
Well, yeah, I have to confess that I have a strong faith in the Romanian contemporary poetry, really, in the young poets and in the mature poets. I'm reading a lot of Romanian poetry and I have this faith. It is a strong poetry, it's deep, it is very diversified. And I think it's maybe the strongest art now in Romania. Stronger than the fiction, than novels, stronger than the theater, stronger than sculpture or painting. I think poetry, as I wrote in another book of poetry of mine, the poetry is the only one. And I remember a short story of the famous Russian writer Varlam Shalamov. He was sent in Siberia for almost 20 years. And he has the title of one of short story, is The Ethical Nights. And here he's explaining that in Siberia at minus 40 degrees or minus 50 degrees, there is no God, there is no compassion, there is no friendship, but there is poetry. Because the poetry was God, the readings of poetry was a form of God, was a form of resistance, was a form of communion. So yes, I think the poetry is the only one. But together with the question you put to us, I have also a question to Andrei. Do you think, Andrei, because I spoke about my arrogance to try to cure Romania and to try to cure symbolically my mother, in a way I failed. Do you think, Andrei, that pandemic 2020 will cure something or will try to cure something?
Well, this is difficult, but I don't share your optimistic view of poetry in the United States in the same way. And I know that Romanian poets are writing and doing well. I think what has happened here is the sprouting of schools of poetry, of universities offering creative writing courses, and it has diluted, in a certain sense, the language. It has become more of what somebody called a Mac poem. And I think that Siberia is a better school than the Iowa University writing program, because at 20 degrees below zero, poetry is still there. It is poetry. Poets coming from Iowa are looking for a small slice of a non-existent pie. But that said, I think that what is poetry now is also environmentalism. It is also science, and it is also discovery, of the rapid discovery in all sorts of areas. I think some technology is the enemy, some technology is our friend, and science is definitely our friend. We're discovering extraordinary things all the time. And so if we somehow manage to make, to allow our poems to accommodate other languages of science and the environment, and maybe to speak from the point of view of animals, I think we're definitely going to have a new post-pandemic healing. But we have to make friends with the animals that we now shoot, or if we don't shoot, we try to be friends with, but that is impossible. We must be them.
And speaking about the question that Gabriela noted from a follower, do you think that Forgiven Submarine can be also a sort of solution today during the pandemic?
Well, I'm not sure what there is to forgive, except our history. What there is to forgive is the sort of the mistakes of and the species mistakes, in not considering ourselves part of a biological entity. The Earth, Mother Earth, Gaia, is a living creature, and the reason for the diversity of forms, why we have elephants and why we have people, is because each one different species is an organ of this particular large being. And I think that when that recognition sinks in, I think that we are going to heal a lot. If we won't become immortal, which I'm very happy about, we'll go back to that great primordial soup and make ourselves useful. But as to immediate healing, to the therapeutic and the psychological business, I don't know much about, because I don't. I do and I don't, but I think you have to nurture your wounds. They will never be healed.
Thank you very much to both of you. It's been an extraordinary evening and a therapeutic one at the same time, totally. And thank you so much to everyone who watched us tonight. Don't forget to tune in for our following events and keep on rocking.